Hello and welcome to our Charged Google It series. My name is Grace. I'm the lay pastor for youth and students at St John's, and today I'm joined by James, our curate, who's going to be answering the next question in our series. If you haven't seen any of our previous episodes, you can go onto YouTube and watch those back for some of the other questions that we've answered. But today we're asking the question, what does Christianity teach about heaven and hell? James?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is lots.
Good.
So, thanks for watching.
We can unpack that a little bit
Oh,
more.
right. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, we can. It does teach lots. And to be fair, we're never going to get to the bottom of it. Even in a little conversation like this, there's been hundreds and hundreds of years of scholarly, academic theology that has sought to unpack exactly what does the Bible, what does the body of belief of Christianity exactly mean when it talks about heaven, when it talks about hell, and it talks about the timing and all of that. So I think ultimately what I'd like to say is that Christianity, the doctrine and the understanding of heaven and hell is not as scary, I think, as some might think it is. It's actually a little bit simpler, albeit it's got a lot in there and a lot to think about. And I'd love to just encourage, and this isn't answering the question, so you'll hate me for this. I'd love to just encourage you to be in Acts 17. It talks about being there's a group of Christians called the Bereans, and the Bereans searched the scriptures daily for wisdom and understanding about what was true. I'd really love to encourage Charged and us as a church really to be like the Bereans, who were diligent and really loved getting into the Bible to actually understand daily these dense and really hard topics like heaven and hell.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about heaven and hell, Jesus never, I don't think, as I read the Bible, as I read the New Testament, Jesus never scared people into religion. That was never his intention. However, he did speak to religious people quite strongly about the dangers of heaven, of hell, to scare them out of self-righteousness.
That's a big word.
It is a big word. So self-righteousness is basically relying on yourself and putting yourself at the centre of your world rather than God. It's basically saying you are God in place of God. That's self-righteousness. Whatever the situation, whatever the thought, whatever the decision, if it's all comes down to how you come off best, how you can make the decision without even thinking about God, self-righteousness. And Jesus spoke to the religious people to draw them out of that, to save them from that, of thinking that they're sorted, of thinking that they can do it on their own without God. And so with that in mind, that Jesus never scared people into religion, I hope that we would never do the same. That we wouldn't use hell as a scaremongering tactic. However, hell is I believe, a real danger. And the way in which we need to think about that is deeply, and like a Berean searching the scriptures. So the Bible thinks of hell in probably 3 or 4 distinct ways, and we'll go through them if that's all right. Firstly, it's in the Old Testament. It talks about Sheol, which is the grave, which talks about, it's basically an analogy, a picture, a word to describe death, and that's Sheol. It's an Old Testament word, and really all people go to Sheol, because all people go to the grave.
Yeah.
So we can kind of discount that. So when that word comes up in the Bible, Sheol, it's not talking about hell. It's talking about death, which is different. Then there's as you go to the New Testament, you've got probably three other words that come up in the use of in the word hell. Sometimes it's referred to as Hades, sometimes it's referred to as Gehenna, and sometimes it's referred to as Tartarus. Hades is kind of like described as this temporary place where people go, where only the souls of the dead exist, and they go there to await judgment. So it's kind of like a holding place. It's not a nice place, but it's a temporal place. It's a time bound. It will have an end to it.
Is that the same as limbo?
Well, limbo, I think, is probably because there's so many. Every kind of like thought and theology and belief system around the world has a version of Hades. I think of this place where you either are awaiting a judgment or you enter into hell. But in the New Testament sense, Hades is referred to as a kind of waiting place. It's a very common thought process around at the time when the New Testament was being written. Then you've got this Tartarus one, which I think is weird. Tartarus is kind of like this abyss. It's a place which is it's rooted in pagan mythology again. So it's using the language of the time when the New Testament is being written, and it's a place of terrible torment in the afterlife, of kind of like ongoing torment. It's lower than Hades. It's a place for the dead, and it gets talked about. And I have to read this because it gets talked about in several different places. One is 2 Peter, book of 2 Peter, chapter 2, verse 4. It says, God did not spare angels when they sinned, but he sent them to Tartarus, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. So that one's a bit confusing with the Hades one, but this is a deeper place of that is reserved for, and it seems to be from Genesis 6, we get told that there is these angels that sinned, and they got sent to this Tartarus, this place where they're held in pits of gloom for a later judgment. So there seems to be a real, there's going to be a judgment for these angels, these beings that have sinned against God, and that's Tartarus, and that's the place where they'll be held. Interestingly, in Luke's Gospel, there's a story about a legion of demons that Jesus ultimately sends into a group of pigs, and they fly off a cliff. That's for another time. Ask Grace about that one. But they beg not to be thrown into Tartarus. Don't throw us into the abyss, they shout. Instead, let us go into the pigs. So you have to beg. It begs the question: how bad is Tartarus, this hell, this word that is used for hell, if even the demons don't want to go there?
Yeah.
They'd rather be thrown into pigs. Yeah. So hell, this is what we're building a picture of how bad hell is, and we've already, like I say, there's so much we could talk about in this. And the last one, the last word that is used for hell in the New Testament is Gehenna, which is this rubbish heap. It's a place of burning, of where the animals fight over the scraps. You can imagine the kind of place with all the stinking piles of rubbish, of decomposing food, of even, it has to be said, even people that have been killed and murdered are sometimes thrown there because it's a way of disposing of them, which is horrible to think about. But it's building the picture of just what a place hell can be. So, what is hell in the Bible? Leaving heaven aside just for a moment, what is hell? It's a place where there seems to be in the Bible, in the New Testament particularly, teaching of a place where there is fire, gnashing of teeth, wailing, of a place of torment. It's not a nice place.
How did they know?
How did they know
that there was a hell? Because they've not died. So I guess one of the questions for nowadays is lots of people just don't believe there is anything after life.
Yeah.
So how do we know this is a real place?
So I think we actually, as a society, as people, we know that there's something not right. We know that there's actually something going on in the world that we either are experiencing, so a sense of hell on earth, or we know that there is something that, or we, perhaps even secretly, we hope that there is a hell and a heaven, because we quite like to go to heaven, and we'd like to send other people to hell because they've done bad things, they've done wrong things. And in the medieval ages, and I think just after, there was this famous painting by Dante, or was it a painting or a writing? Anyway, Dante kind of imagined the hell and the inferno of hell, and he had it as kind of like these rings of ever decreasing circles that would just go down, and you wouldn't want to find yourself at the bottom, because that's the place for real, the most terrible people that you can imagine. You want to find yourself up near the top, if anywhere, if there at all, to be honest. And I think we still kind of hold on to that for some reason, like in the same way that we hold on to God is on a cloud in the sky and he's up there. We hold on to this other image, which is hell is down there, and it gets worse the more you go down into it. So I can't remember what your original question was, but
whether hell was real, which I think you've answered very well. I guess the second question to that is, how might one find themselves in hell? You talked about sin already, but this doesn't sound like a place we want to be.
There is a train of thought with hell that I don't know whether you know the grand story of the Bible and of God and his relationship with humans and the world. But, back in Genesis, we think about the garden being a place where you are in perfect relationship with God, the creator, the one who made you, the one who knows you. And he's in perfect relationship with humanity in the people of Adam and Eve. And yet, in Adam and Eve, something happens where they decide to be self-righteous and go their own way. And they deny God the place that he is rightly deserving in their life, and they choose to enter into a kind of hell, because it means that they're separate. We all have relationships, right, where we know that I'm at odds with another person. It doesn't feel right, and it eats away at you, and it's kind of like a disease that kind of like really eats you up and worms its way through you, and it's like that with God. It's exactly. I think it's very similar in the sense that we're made for perfect relationship, where we're within that safety and that kind of, it's not energy, but it's like his life-giving power. He enfolds us in it, and he shares it with us, and we're part of him, and so we have life and life to the full. Whereas when we deny God and when we sin and when we turn away from him, we're entering into, and this is ultimately what happens in the Garden of Eden, is that Adam and Eve are cast out. They're sent out from God's presence into a kind of living hell, where things are hard, relationships are hard, work is hard, nothing goes right, death happens. They're not sustained by a loving Heavenly Father. So I think that's one way of answering that. Actually, we enter into it through our own pride. We enter into hell. Now that's one way of explaining it.
So that's a really great and thorough explanation of what hell might be like. It sounds like a place that we don't want to go.
Yeah.
So we want to go to heaven, right? That's our end goal.
Yeah.
That's what we're aiming for. How do we get there?
How do we get there? That's a great question. And how do we get to heaven? Well, I think by having being in relationship with Jesus, we you know the Lord's Prayer, right? I mean, go and look it up, go and Google it. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So whenever we pray that, we're actually, what we're asking for God to do is to make my situation, make my life like it should be. Like it should be where you are. You're in heaven, I'm on earth. I want your heaven, the place where you are, that paradise, that garden, that Garden of Eden kind of existence, of living in harmony with you, of being invited into that self-giving love that the Trinity, that Father, Son and Spirit enjoy, and that sparked everything off. I want to be in that. And I think simply, how do we get to heaven? Jesus is clear that he's the only way to the Father. He's the way, the truth, and the life. So we do it by living with Jesus as centre of our lives, by giving our lives to him and saying, by your Spirit, come and live in me and help me to live heaven now.
That's an interesting phrase.
So that's kind of like twisting slightly, because I think I'm just trying to move us away from that idea of heaven is somewhere we end up to somewhere that heaven actually is, we invite heaven into now, here and now. And you know, the Bible, it's not like crystal clear, but it talks about a time when, in Revelation, which is an allegory. It's like this big picture of dragons and fire and swords and beasts and everything. Go and read it. If you love Lord of the Rings, if you love Narnia or anything like that, go and read Revelation, because it's amazing. But it's an allegory, it's a picture, and it talks about how this time is going to come where heaven and earth are going to be made one, where the earth will be renewed. It talks about it being rolled up like a carpet, and kind of the new heavens and new earth are laid out. But basically it's about where heaven and earth are made new. And we get a picture of that, don't we, at Christmas. Because at Christmas, what is the Christmas story? It's about God coming to earth. So it's not about us trying to get somewhere. It's not about me trying to get to heaven. There's nothing I can do to get to heaven. It's all about God coming to us. Jesus coming to us as a baby. Jesus coming to us as we invite him to live in our lives, and with him as the centre. Jesus sending his Spirit. We just celebrated at Pentecost. Sending his Spirit to live in me, to help me live in a way that looks like Jesus. And that's how we trust in him. We have faith in him alone, that at the end of the day, whenever that day is, we will be with him in that new heaven and new earth.
I love those bits in Revelation about the new heaven and the new earth. And we've talked a bit about like what hell is like. Yeah. Does it say there like what that new world will be like?
Good question. Yeah. Revelation 21 is probably the passage that mostly comes to mind, isn't it, when we think about what it's going to be like. So I'll open it, because then I won't be actually making it up off the top of my head. So Revelation 21 talks about a new heaven and a new earth, and John has this vision, this dream, this kind of like supernatural experience where God kind of shows him what it's going to be like. And he said, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea, which is a shame, because I quite like the sea. Never mind. I saw this holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, dressed beautifully as a bride is dressed beautifully for her husband. God's dwelling place is now among the people. He will dwell with them. They'll be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear away from their eyes. How amazing is that? That God himself is going to wipe away your tears. Amazing. There'll be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying or pain, which is amazing to think after the year that we've had and so many losses and deaths due to COVID, that there is a day that is promised by God that there'll be no more death, no more tears, no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain. There's a hellish, but there's a day coming when heaven won't be any, it will be void of all of that. There won't be any of that around. I think I love that. I can't wait.
I love that too, and I love what you were saying before about how heaven can break in now as well.
Yeah.
Is that we can see some of that stuff now, and we can pray for that now. That's been a lot of great stuff, and I love it, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it. And I'm sure that you've still got some more particular questions or personal questions for your own situation. Please do send them in to either myself or you can email James. We'd love to talk to you more about your concerns about heaven and hell. And if I can ask James, maybe we can, I'll give you a few moments to think about this. If you could sum up an answer to what does Christianity say about heaven and hell in a couple of sentences, what would you say?
What does Christianity teach about heaven and hell? I think it teaches that it's true, that there is a real heaven and a real hell. So we have to be careful when people try and water it down, that, God is love, and he loves everyone so much that he doesn't want to see them live for eternity without him. That's why Jesus came. I think it's true. It's hard, and actually we should acknowledge that more. It's hard when we because we love people, and that love, I think, has been misguided in the past. Sometimes to bash people over the head, sometimes literally with the Bible, but other times it's been used to bash people over the head and say, you must do this so that you don't go to hell. Well, at the end of the day, the Bible never teaches that we're the arbiters of that. We don't get to decide. There's one judge, and that's God, and he will come and judge all of us, everyone, on what we've done, and what we've done primarily with Jesus. Have we accepted him? I think we kind of like to think that heaven and hell are some of these ever, like they're stages, like, there's they kind of go up, I'm trying to think of what goes up and down. Give me a second.
A ladder?
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah. I don't know why I was struggling with that one.
A lift?
I was thinking that was my lift, and I was like, but then you'd need so many different levels. Anyway, so a ladder. And we try to think, I'm on that rung of the ladder, or that step of the ladder, but those people, they're at least 3 down. Or I'm about here on the heaven scale. Those people are so good, aren't they? Those people are worthy. They must be right up near the top. I think Jesus never, he comes and says, it's not like that, guys. It's not about that up and down on different levels. It's about, ultimately, do you know me? And have you responded to me? Or have you not? It's really stark. It's like, have you responded to me, Jesus? Have you responded to Jesus, or have you rejected him? Have you responded, and which way have you responded? Have you responded in a kind of, I want to follow you, I believe in you? Ultimately, that's what the Bible teaches about heaven and hell. It's what we do with Jesus.